Kieron Thalor and Zarela Mique were the picture of perfection, young, wealthy, and hopelessly in love. Their wedding was a lavish affair, their honeymoon a dream escape to the turquoise waters of Fiji. But within days, Zarela would be dead, stuffed inside a suitcase at the bottom of the ocean, and Kieron would vanish without a trace, leaving behind only bloodstains, forged documents, and a kayak drifting in the tide. What began as a luxury honeymoon turned into an international manhunt for a killer who never truly existed. Zarela Mique had always lived a life wrapped in wanderlust and luxury. At 29, she had built a successful career as a travel blogger and influencer, with over 500,000 followers who eagerly waited for her next post from some far-flung corner of the world. Her content was glossy, vibrant, and carefully curated. She was known for her bright smile, flowing beach dresses, and a talent for making paradise look even more perfect. But beneath the filters and hashtags, Zarela was also someone who longed for real love. When she met Kieron Thalor through an exclusive travel networking app, she believed she'd finally found it. Kieron was introduced as a 34-year-old investment consultant based in Auckland. He had an air of mystery. Tall, sharply, dressed with minimal social media presence, but just enough charm to pull Zarela in. Their connection was fast and intense. Within weeks, they were travelling together through Bali, the Maldives, and southern Italy. Friends expressed concern over how quickly things were moving, but Zarela dismissed the warnings. She believed she'd found her match, someone who not only shared her love of travel, but brought a stability she hadn't known before. The wedding was extravagant and picture-perfect, held at a cliffside resort overlooking the sea in New Zealand. Zarela wore a custom designer gown, and drones captured every moment from above. Just days later, they boarded a private charter plane to Fiji for their honeymoon. Zarela had handpicked the location, Kayak, a private island resort famed for its seclusion and natural beauty. It was the kind of place where the villas had glass floors above the reef, and your meals were delivered by boat. Only 6 couples could stay at one time, and every guest was attended to like royalty. When the couple arrived, resort staff noted how breathtaking they looked together. Zarela, glowing in a floral wrap, waved excitedly at the camera crew who welcomed them with a traditional Fijian ceremony. Kieron, on the other hand, appeared more reserved. He smiled politely, but his eyes were distant, scanning the coastline as if looking for something or someone. Their first few days on the island were marked by Instagram-worthy moments. Zarela documented their villa, the food, the sunset yoga, sessions, and late-night swims in their private plunge pool. But something began to shift behind the scenes. Housekeeping staff reported that Kieron would often leave the villa early in the morning and return just before dinner. He wasn't seen engaging in the usual honeymoon activities. He declined spa appointments and skipped the island excursions. While Zarela spent time with other honeymooners at beach bonfires, Kieron was often spotted walking alone by the cliffs or kayaking beyond the reef for hours at a time. Zarela didn't post about the distance, but her last few captions hinted at a subtle unease. "Winds change, but the sea stays," read one post of her standing alone at the edge of the villa's dock. Another, of her staring into a bonfire, was simply captioned, "Trying to be still." On the third night, she posted what would be Her final image, a selfie in front of the sunset, with her hand reaching back toward the camera. The caption read, "Never been happier." That post quickly gained thousands of likes. Fans commented on how stunning she looked, how lucky she was. No one suspected it would be the last time they'd see her alive. Early the next morning, Zarela missed her breakfast order. Staff thought she was sleeping in. But when lunchtime came and she still hadn't appeared, concerns began to rise. A cleaner entered the villa and found the bed perfectly made, as though no one had slept in it. Her clothes were untouched, but her favourite scarf was missing. The private plunge pool was calm. There was no sign of a struggle. That same morning, the resort's security guard noticed a kayak missing from the dock. Hours later, a fisherman spotted it floating aimlessly near the reef, its paddle broken and one sandal lying inside. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the staff realized something terrible might have happened. Zarela and Kieron had vanished from paradise without a trace. The initial response to Zarela and Kieron's disappearance was confusion and quiet panic. The resort staff, trained to manage elite guests discreetly, first conducted a private search around the island. They assumed the couple had gone for a private excursion or taken a boat ride without informing anyone. But by sunset, it was clear this wasn't just a miscommunication. A resort boat was sent out to circle the surrounding waters. The once idyllic mood among the other guests shifted to tense silence. When the missing kayak was recovered near a coral outcrop, there were immediate concerns. It had been found drifting with no occupants, its oar cracked, a single male sandal wedged between the seat and hull, and an empty energy drink can crushed near the backrest. The kayak was one of the resort's own, signed out under Kieron Thalor's name. What troubled staff most was that it had not been returned, and that no one had seen the couple leave that morning. Security footage from the shoreline, meant mostly to deter trespassers, showed very little. The camera pointed toward the communal dock was obscured by palm trees during the early morning hours. That evening, the resort notified local authorities in Fiji. A police patrol boat arrived within hours, along with a handful of detectives and divers. They began searching the coastline while interviewing the remaining guests and staff. Most people had nothing useful to report. A few guests remembered seeing Zarela at the previous night's beach bonfire, alone, laughing and chatting with a newlywed couple. Kieron had not attended. No one had seen him that night. Inside the couple's villa, police found Zarela's personal belongings, including her phone, passport, jewelry, and laptop, all untouched. Her suitcase remained packed neatly, though her favourite scarf and camera were missing. Kieron's items told a different story. His duffel bag was open and half empty. His phone and travel documents were also gone. It was as if he had made a quiet exit, leaving only traces of his presence behind. The next morning, as helicopters flew over the surrounding islands, a call came in from a village on a nearby island about 40 kilometers from Kavatiki. A local boy had discovered something odd while digging through the trash bins behind a small convenience shop. Among the debris, he had found what looked like an expensive smartwatch, cracked and covered in sand, but still faintly blinking. When police examined it, they confirmed it belonged to Zarela. GPS logs showed it had last registered movement 2 days earlier. This discovery changed the direction of the case. Authorities initially suspected the couple may have drowned or gotten lost at sea. But now, foul play was on the table. The idea of an accidental kayaking incident made less sense when one half of the couple's property was found on a completely different island. The tide would not have carried the watch that far, and certainly not into a trash bin. Forensics on the watch revealed small blood traces on the inner strap. DNA results later confirmed it matched Zarela. The watch had been forcibly removed. Investigators now began to focus on Kieron. He had left no digital trail. His credit cards hadn't been used, his phone was off, and he hadn't logged into any known accounts since the morning of their disappearance. Resort staff offered detailed reports, confirming Kieron's erratic behavior. One worker recalled him asking about strong currents near the southern end of the island just 2 days prior. Police also discovered that Kieron had requested a staff member to bring him something sharp to cut fishing line the day before. When the staffer handed him a small utility blade, Kieron took it without further explanation. That blade was now missing from the villa. Interpol was alerted. Zarela's family, devastated and still in Spain, was told that their daughter was officially missing under suspicious circumstances. Media outlets caught wind of the luxury honeymoon gone wrong, and soon the story was plastered across international headlines. As the second day of the investigation drew to a close, search teams were deployed more aggressively. Divers searched the reefs, and dogs were flown in from the mainland to examine both the resort and the island's dense forest interior. All led to dead ends, until a diver exploring the eastern side of the island found something unnatural nestled between rocks on the ocean floor, the silver corner of a suitcase. The discovery of the suitcase on the ocean floor was a grim turning point. It was wedged tightly between two coral-covered rocks, about 15 feet underwater, in a spot rarely explored due to strong undercurrents. At first, divers believed it might have been swept in from a passing boat, but when they brought it to the surface and opened it, the reality was far more horrifying. Inside, curled into a fetal position, was the lifeless body of Zarela Mique. Her skin was pale and mottled, showing clear signs of having been submerged for several days. Her hands were bound tightly with fishing line, and her neck bore dark bruises consistent with strangulation. The suitcase was filled with small stones, likely to weigh it down and keep it from floating. Her scarf, the same one she'd worn in her final Instagram post, was wrapped around her mouth as a gag. Investigators on site stood silently for a moment, overcome by the shocking brutality. This was no accident. It was murder. An immediate autopsy was arranged. The medical examiner's report confirmed what the divers had suspected. Zarela had died by manual strangulation, and there were signs she had struggled. Bruises on her forearms and several broken fingernails suggested she had fought back. No drugs or alcohol were found in her system, and there were no injuries indicating she had fallen or hit her head. The most unsettling detail came from her lungs. Tiny particles of volcanic sand were found inside, meaning she was still alive, though barely, when her face had been pressed into the shoreline during the attack. That particular sand type was unique to one stretch of Kavatiki's southern shore. This discovery painted a clearer picture of what might have happened. Zarela had likely been attacked near the southern edge of the island, possibly while walking alone at dawn. She had either been lured there or followed. After being strangled and gagged, her body was placed in the suitcase, weighed down, and submerged offshore in hopes that the currents and coral would hide it permanently. But nature, as it often does, refused to keep the secret. Back at the resort, panic turned to fury. Staff who had once quietly admired the beautiful couple now spoke of the disturbing moments they'd noticed. Kieron's cold demeanour, his avoidance of affection, and the increasingly distant look in his eyes. A few remembered Zarela trying to engage him in conversation during group dinners, only for him to respond with short, distracted answers. One guest, a honeymooner from Japan, mentioned seeing Kieron kayaking toward the southern tip of the island early on the morning of their disappearance. No one thought anything of it at the time. Police turned their focus entirely to Kieron Thalor. But as they tried to contact his family, employers, and financial institutions, they hit a wall. Every path led to nowhere. The investment firm he claimed to work for had no record of him. His listed emergency contact was a disconnected number. Even his passport, when examined more closely, raised red flags. The holograms and watermarks were slightly off. A forensic document specialist confirmed their worst fear. It was a high-quality forgery. This revelation stunned investigators. Kieron Thalor, the husband, the man who had just married and honeymooned with Zarela Mique, didn't exist. He was a phantom, a fabricated identity used to charm and deceive. With no known real name and no official background, tracking him became exponentially harder. Border controls were alerted, and ports were put on high alert across Fiji and neighbouring countries. Authorities scoured the area where the drifting kayak had been found. Using drones and sea patrols, they mapped possible escape routes. One route, while extremely risky, seemed plausible. If Kieron had paddled to the nearby island where Zarela's smartwatch had been discovered, he could have made landfall, disposed of incriminating evidence, and caught a ride on a local fishing boat to the mainland. From there, he could have vanished into the busy streets and ports of Suva, or even caught an unregulated cargo ship off the coast. As the international manhunt gained momentum, media coverage exploded. The story had everything: glamour, romance, mystery, and murder. But behind the headlines was a haunting truth. Zarela had travelled the world searching for beauty and connection, only to meet her end in a place meant to symbolize love. And the man she believed would protect her turned out to be a predator hiding behind a mask. As the search for Kieron Thalor intensified, authorities faced a disturbing reality. They were chasing a ghost. With no verified identity, no family ties, and no digital footprints beyond what he'd carefully constructed, investigators feared they were up against a highly calculated and experienced con man. A full forensic sweep of the honeymoon villa at Kayak yielded only a few vague clues: fingerprints on a wine glass, a strand of hair in the bathroom sink, and smudged fingerprints on the doorframe of the kayak shed. But when sent through international databases, none of the biometric data returned a single match. Interpol issued a red notice, and airports across the Pacific were placed on high alert. Flyers with Kieron's photo, taken from wedding footage, and Zarela's posts circulated rapidly. But days passed with no confirmed sightings. It was as if the man had evaporated into thin air. Then, on the 8th day after Zarela's body was discovered, authorities received a tip from a fisherman near the island of Overlau, over 120 kilometers from Kayak. The fisherman claimed to have given a ride to a strange man the morning after the reported incident. He remembered the man had no luggage, paid in cash, and said he had been shipwrecked while exploring nearby reefs. His story had seemed odd, but the money was good, so the fisherman didn't ask questions. When shown a photo of Kieron, the man immediately confirmed the match. This tipped the investigation into high gear. Police began searching Overlau and surrounding villages. They canvassed guest houses, questioned shop owners, and reviewed ferry logs. Finally, in a cheap boarding house tucked into the hillside above a fishing dock, they found a room that had been checked out just a day before. Inside were discarded items, a burnt passport in the sink, blood-stained gauze in the trash, and a shaving razor that, when tested, contained traces of Kieron's DNA. But once again, he was gone. The discovery of the burnt passport, which had the name Daniel Toren, was the first real break. Investigators sent it through every known identity fraud database and finally got a lead. A decade-old fraud investigation in South Africa mentioned a man using that alias. It was a cold case, abandoned when the suspect disappeared after defrauding a series of high-profile clients. The photo attached to that file matched Kieron almost perfectly, just younger and with longer hair. With this new name, more pieces began to fall into place. Daniel Toren, or whoever he really was, had used over 9 aliases across several countries, often targeting women with high public profiles or access to money. He'd seduce them, gain trust, and then disappear, sometimes with their money, sometimes with their secrets. But until Zarela, no one had ever turned up dead. Authorities now believed Zarela had been his most dangerous target, not because of her fame, but because she was beginning to see through him. For weeks, she had reportedly grown quieter in her posts. She stopped tagging him. She had even scheduled a video call with her sister the day after the murder, perhaps planning to share doubts or reveal things she'd discovered. That call never happened. FBI profilers were brought in to analyze his behavior. They concluded that Kieron, or Daniel, wasn't just a con man. He was a calculated predator, likely a narcissist with sociopathic traits. He didn't just want control over his victims' lives. He wanted control over their deaths too. Zarela, ever curious and observant, had likely figured something out. And instead of disappearing like he usually did, Daniel silenced her to protect his identity. With pressure mounting, a digital task force began scanning obscure message boards and private networks. Eventually, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A blurry surveillance photo from a harbor in Manila, Philippines. The image showed a man resembling Kieron boarding a container ship registered under a Panamanian flag. His face was partially obscured, but the posture, jawline, and clothing all matched. It was dated 3 days after the fisherman claimed to have dropped him off. By the time officials reached the port, the ship was long gone. Its last registered destination was the Red Sea. Authorities believed he might be heading to East Africa, possibly to resurface under yet another alias. Zarela's killer was out there, and he knew how to disappear. But now the world was watching, and his face was everywhere. What he hadn't counted on was the growing network of people determined to bring him to justice. Months passed. The media storm surrounding Zarela Mique's murder slowly faded from front-page news. But the hunt for her killer never stopped. International law enforcement agencies collaborated across borders, driven not just by duty, but by the chilling realization that this man, who had manipulated, deceived, and ultimately killed, could strike again. His ability to erase his past, blend into new identities, and exploit people's trust made him more dangerous than ever. Interpol's Red Notice expanded into a full-scale, multinational operation. Cyber units across Europe and Asia worked in shifts tracking bank transactions, dark web activity, and communications flagged for known phrases tied to his aliases. But the man they were hunting had gone completely dark. It was as though he had rehearsed this escape for years. And then, one afternoon, a routine customs check at a small port in Djibouti turned everything around. A man travelling under the name Marcus Veldin was detained for possessing falsified documents. He had a European passport that failed verification, and while the man initially claimed to be a lost traveller, nervous and confused, a sharp-eyed officer noticed a small scar behind his ear, identical to one described in Daniel Toren's file. The officer raised an alert, and within hours, forensic analysis confirmed a match to fingerprints found at the scene of Zarela's murder. The man was arrested and held in a fortified facility. News of his capture ignited headlines once again. Zarela's family, who had lived in agonizing limbo, finally received the call they had hoped for. Her killer had been caught. Under interrogation, Marcus Veldin offered no resistance. He denied nothing, but he also confessed to nothing. He simply stated that people like her always ruin things. His chilling lack of remorse stunned investigators. He spoke with a calm detachment, refusing to explain his motives or real identity. Every time authorities thought they had uncovered his truth, another layer of lies unraveled. Back in Fiji, preparations began to extradite him. Despite legal hurdles, overwhelming evidence supported the case. DNA on the gauze, the watch, the suitcase, the utility blade, surveillance footage from multiple islands, testimony from the fisherman, and forged documents linking all his aliases. Prosecutors worked tirelessly to ensure nothing could jeopardize the trial. When he was flown to Fiji under heavy security, residents lined the roads in silence as armored vehicles escorted him to court. The trial began 6 months later and drew worldwide attention. Courtrooms overflowed with media, Zarela's grieving family, and curious citizens. The prosecution laid out every grim detail, from the fake wedding and the staged honeymoon to the calculated murder and escape. The defense argued that evidence was circumstantial and that identity confusion was possible, but the overwhelming volume of facts told a different story. Zarela's mother spoke on the final day of the trial, her voice trembling as she held a framed photo of her daughter. She described Zarela's light, her dreams, and the trust she placed in the man who became her husband. Her pain hung heavy in the air. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, the courtroom was silent. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without parole in Fiji's maximum security prison. Still, the man who had called himself Kieron Thalor showed no emotion. He stared straight ahead, unflinching, as if he were simply watching the final scene of someone else's story. But this wasn't fiction. Zarela was real. Her dreams were real. Her death was real. And now, finally, there was justice. In the aftermath, her family started a foundation in her name, supporting victims of romance fraud and international crime. Her story became a warning for others, not to mistrust love, but to recognize danger, even when it comes in the most charming disguise. And as for the man with no name, no past, and no soul, he would spend the rest of his life in a cell, far from the oceans he once used to disappear, with only silence and stone to greet him each day.